Bendy in the Dark Revival has a lot hidden within it, and in this video, we will be taking a look behind the scenes to see how the development team tackled Chapter 2. There's a lot of unseen things, and I break quite a few of them. From taking a look at the Ink Demon's jump scare, to revealing how Bendy's, quite honestly, scariest encounter works. The fourth Butcher Gang member is terrifying, and how they work is intriguing. I even find a secret room out of bounds. There's a lot to cover and break, so if you enjoy all things Bendy, consider subscribing right now, so you don't miss any of my videos. But without further ado, I hope you enjoy this bizarre breakdown. So before even diving into Chapter 2, I have two leftover things from Chapter 1 that I want to talk about. So as the player gets closer to the end of Chapter 1, they come across this door that tells them to not knock on it. Now when they do knock on it, a lost one opens the door and then basically slams it in their face. And I did not cover this in the first video, so this is what it looks like behind the scenes when that lost one shuts the door. They basically close it and then they vanish. Now the second thing I find a little bit more interesting than this, and it's when you go down the hallway to collect the drawings that you need to open this door, that you see the shadow of the Ink Demon on the wall in front of you. And as you break the lock off this door, that shadow starts moving and it disappears. So at first I was thinking, oh, there must be a really bright light around this corner, and they have the model of the Ink Demon standing there off camera. But that's not entirely true, at least visually from the player's perspective. If we skip the trigger and go back there with Audrey, we'll see that the shadow is coming from nowhere. However, what's actually happening is within the game, the Ink Demon's model, their rigging, is there, it's just not visible in the game engine. It is still being referenced and utilized to cast this shadow on the wall. We can even toggle on the Ink Demon's teeth, and you can see how they disappear from the shadow. Now what's kind of funny is this Ink Demon, although we can't see it, is actually at half scale. You can see how big it is on the wall, but you can see how big Audrey's shadow is on the same wall. So if we change Audrey to be 1/10 the size of her normal height, you can see how big that shadow is. So there's actually a smaller version of this Ink Demon model that is being used to cast this shadow from a low angle. But that was just two things from Chapter 1 that I wanted to cover, but now let's actually move on to Chapter 2. So probably the most notable thing to me in Chapter 2, right off the bat, is that the Ink Demon can now jump scare you. We are introduced to this concept as we're collecting all the paintings. So the thing is, when the Ink Demon jump scares you, it always appears behind you and you can't see it. So, as you may have guessed, what actually happens is the second the jump scare occurs, the demon is teleported right behind you. And then Audrey is instructed to turn around and see the demon. At this point, it plays one of several different animations in which the Ink Demon defeats Audrey. But this is what the stomp animation looks like in slow motion. We can see the Ink Demon actually wind up and clip through the top of the ceiling. And in slow motion, they very slowly descend upon Audrey with a mighty stomp from their hoof. And just like the other jump scares from this monster, the second they make contact with Audrey, the game cuts to black and gives a game over screen. But as we make our way out of the vents in this area, we eventually come across, quite honestly, what I believe to be the scariest encounter in this game. And that is the fourth Butcher Gang member. So the player comes across this crate, they open it up, and they see this sort of inactive monster inside, but the second they turn away, that monster vanishes. And this works exactly the same way that writing did in Chapter 1. As soon as the active camera for Unity can no longer register this object being in its field of view, it will unload or swap. So this creature is actually the fourth Butcher Gang member called Carly, except this mutant variant is called Slicer. And the second you open this crate, Slicer will haunt you for the rest of the game. And this was very nerve-wracking for me, because it almost seems like Slicer as a character is hunting you down while they're invisible. So the player cannot tell if Slicer is moving around on the map as an invisible entity, and that makes you kind of freak out. I remember the first time I stepped out of that room, and I got jump scared by Slicer like 3 times in a row. And it just made me think that Slicer was actually moving around the map, sort of like a Mr. X type enemy from Resident Evil, and that they would forever hunt me down. And based on the locations that you encounter Slicer in, it kind of gives that feeling throughout the rest of the game. However, I am here to put your fears to rest, because that is not how Slicer works at all. And honestly, I'm kind of relieved. So Slicer as an enemy is made up of invisible triggers. And the second the player enters that trigger range, well, Slicer is going to spawn and run at them with a jump scare. However, if we take away Slicer's invisibility cloak, you'll see that Slicer is actually stationary. Slicer is more so like a trap that the player can trigger. And looking at the map, you can see there are multiple Slicers all around this room. So each of these slicers, when activated, will appear and run at Audrey. However, this first hallway right outside the studio has so many Slicer encounters that can be triggered that it makes it feel like Slicer is actually moving around while invisible. And honestly, in my opinion, this is incredible game design by the team who made this game, because they create the illusion that this monster is more than it actually is. And from that point forward, you're watching your back thinking that something is lurking behind you. And that's incredibly scary. But we're going to put Slicer to rest and move on. And now we encounter Porter. So the first time we encounter Porter, he's across the room, and he actually waves at us and then warps out of the way. But if we slow down the game to a crawl, we can see what Porter looks like when he's using his flow ability. And he basically sticks out his hand and he just slides across the floor really, really fast. He eventually comes to a stop out of view in the hallway beside him, and then he unloads. Now, in order to get across this room, we have to lower a pipe so we can walk across it. And as this pipe is lowering, we can take a peek inside the top to see where the pipe used to go. And both sides just lead to a dead end. However, this pipe does fall into a bottomless pit. And if we see where it goes, it actually falls beneath this black curtain and then continues to fall quite a ways before it comes to a rest in the great beyond. And then from that point forward, it just sits down here. So in this next room, in a pipe, there are some slugs that are within it. And I could not pick these up at all. This was on my first playthrough, and I was not sure if the trigger was missing, but I could not collect these at all. I'm not sure if this was fixed, but I thought it was worth mentioning. So next up, we have Porter, who's stuck in a pipe. And as you can see, as we free Porter from this pipe, he falls down it. But if we change the camera and view this from below, you can see how Porter just slides out of this pipe into the great beyond. He eventually comes to a rest down here, and then he unloads. Now when Audrey goes down the same pipe, the same thing happens to her. But what's interesting is that there's nothing actually at the bottom of this pipe. Because when we go down this pipe, we get warped across the map back to where we once were. So logically, this would create an impossible situation due to the 3D layout of the studio. Because if we zoom the camera out, we can see that the pipe we came out of is actually higher than the pipe we went in. This is when Porter teaches us flow, and then he warps across this gap, and then he just sort of walks through this door and unloads. Next up, we have the locker room. And as we enter this area, one of the locker rooms is actually closed off. The entrance for it is completely black, and we can see nothing within. And by checking with the camera, we can see that indeed there's nothing behind this black void. There's actually not enough room for anything on the map to even fit there. So basically, it's a dead end. Now, as we push forward to the end of the chapter, we eventually come to Artist's Rest. But before we get there, there's a gate that falls that prevents us from getting to the elevator early. But if the player were to make it through this gate, they would find the hallway just abruptly ends. However, there is a wandering Sin Bendy back here. They're just chilling on the edge of reality, and we can walk through them and nothing we do affects them. Kinda spooky, but let's head into the actual area now. So starting off, there is a malfunctioning door in this area that has a gear inside of it. And behind that door, as you guessed it, is nothing. There's nothing back there at all. However, all around this area, like I described before, are slicers. That fourth Butcher Gang member is hiding all around this place. And if we give ourselves the ability to see them, we will see that they are scattered all around the upper floor. But I found some pretty cool discoveries when I went to find the key for this area. So we have to go down this long hallway and then use our flow ability to go through this hole. Now the second we pick up this key and try to leave, well, Ink Demon Bendy is going to come out. He appears at the end of the hallway, throws a lost one, and then starts chasing us. So first off, let's take a look at that animation from a different perspective. We can see that Bendy just appears, and the second they throw the lost one sort of ragdolls in the corner, and then they start pursuing us. So to mess with Bendy further, I'm going to disable our hit detection so that Bendy cannot hurt us. Bendy will walk right by us, and then they will eventually just walk into the wall and unload. This is because the player normally would not survive this. They're supposed to retreat back into the other room with flow, and doing that usually triggers an animation. But because it never happened, Bendy just walks into the wall. However, it was this fact that Bendy walked into the wall that led me to my next discovery. So beyond this wall, and beyond the place where we get the key, there is a small room out of bounds. So this room is sort of behind where the hallway ends, and also right next to the desk in the other part of the room. And it is a sealed room with no entrance, and within it is like paper on the floor, there's some pencils, and there's a single light above us, but the room itself has nothing else in it besides that. And if we move Audrey into this room, it does have collision, and we can walk around, but I'm not entirely sure what this room is for. It could be left over from an old design, but I'm not sure. As we exit this area and go back upstairs to utilize the crane, a mutant striker can drop from the ceiling to attack us. However, we can break this striker pretty easily. So if it pops out the ceiling and chases us, but then it begins to retreat, we can chase it back to the hole, and as it jumps up into the hole, we can trigger its spawning animation at the same time. So basically, before it finishes unloading, we can cause it to load again. And so what happens is the mutant striker gets hung up, and it gets stuck running in midair, and it will not go away. It will sit like this forever. Making our way to that crane, a bunch of boxes fall off it, and if we go beneath the map, we can see that all the boxes are still there. They're just below the floor, but they do not unload. And last, and I guess certainly least, there are 2 doors by the upgrade ink, and both doors have nothing behind them. They kind of just lead off to nothingness. They just open up straight to the void. And with that, we wrap up our adventure through Chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed this unique look at Bendy in a way that you may have not seen before. Subscribe now if you did, and I'll see all of you in the next video. Cheers!